Now let's look at your school's behavior process. When a school implements SWIS, they look to create a few SWIS documents. Now, in a previous PowerPoint, we talked about the problem behavior definition, so creating those minor and major problem behaviors that are defined to provide that clarity and consistency. The schools are also asked to create a process for handling problem behaviors so that staff will know if they observe a minor behavior, what's the process, and if they observe a major behavior, what's the process. Also, schools create a compatible office discipline referral form that works with the SWIS systems for ease of entering data into SWIS. So let's take a look at Spittler Elementary from Hart Public Schools. So just note that this is how Spittler created their process and their defined problem behaviors. Your school may have a different format. For example, they may have different definitions or observations that they have for minor and major and for how they're going to handle that process. This is just to show you one school example of what you want to look for each of those documents, but also know that there's not always one exact way to do it. You want to customize it, each of these documents, to meet the needs for your school. So with the Spittler example, just note that they have these level 1 minor behaviors that are non-referred. They also have level 2 minor behaviors that occur that do get documented into SWIS, but they have titled non-referred as not being referred to the office. So that's a distinction that this school used and had to train their staff on. What does it mean to be non-referred and referred compared to document into SWIS, either as a minor or a major? So I just want to make sure I share that with you. So they created these problem behavior definitions. So you can see property misuse as a minor. There is no level 1 violations that they wouldn't track, but here we do see for property misuse for a minor that they are going to track in SWIS, that the student engages in minor destruction of property like breaking a pencil, doodling a book, etc. Then it does turn into a level 3 major violation if we have some property damage or vandalism, and that would be documented as a major in SWIS and handled by administration. And then if it turns into something that is illegal, where they also need to contact the police, they have how that looks for that type of behavior that would trigger that reaction. Please keep in mind that the defined problem behaviors, again, are consistent and predictable so that we all are on the same page in the building for how we're tracking those behaviors. Also, keep in mind that we're only going to track those minor behaviors when a student is not responding to classroom management strategies. I always get questions around, well, am I tracking every single behavior? And the answer is no. And that goes with this level 1 in this Spittler example, where sometimes you're going to have kids engage in a minor behavior. You provide a classroom management strategy, the student stops, and they get re-engaged into instruction. That's okay, you don't need to document that. It's if the student continues to engage in minor behavior and you've used a couple different classroom management strategies and they're not responding to that. That's when we really want to start tracking that behavior. Also recognize that the problem behaviors is a fluid document and may need to be updated as your system or behaviors change in your context. Now here's Spittler's example of their process for handling problem behaviors. Again, make sure it's a simple, predictable process and that it needs to be defined, taught, and agreed upon by staff. So here are some different examples of level 1 for those that are non-referred. So if a student is running or there's loud voices, off-task behavior, you want to use some classroom management or reteaching strategies for the appropriate behaviors with the student, but you don't need to document into SWIS. For level 2, maybe some incidental or low incident name calling, throwing small objects, that could be considered a minor incident and be tracked in SWIS as a minor referral. And then, of course, you have your level 3 and level 4, and those would be major referrals entered into SWIS, but then also the administrative team will be handling those problem behaviors. They have down here in this second row how the staff is going to react or what they need to do to handle each level 1, level 2, level 3, or level 4 violations. Also part of the SWIS documents is that compatible ODR form. So as you're going to see in the next section, how you enter data into SWIS, your school will have an ODR form, and you may have used an ODR form in the past. Just know that now, instead of using the ODR form, you're going to be able to log into SWIS directly and enter in that data or in that information right away. However, you still want to have some forms in your classroom or in the office, especially for those staff who are not able to get access to a computer, or if the internet is down, you can track that behavior. Now, I gave you Spittler Elementary's example. You're going to need to check with your school to see what examples or what your SWIS documentation looks like. Typically, principals will go over that documentation at the beginning of the year, and sometimes we'll get feedback or provide some updates to those documents. And just keep in mind, again, answering that question, who enters data into SWIS? As a staff person in the building, you observe a problem behavior or problem incident. Prior or before, maybe you documented that on a piece of paper and handed it to someone to enter into SWIS. Now, SWIS has created an option for staff to log in directly into SWIS and enter that referral information without using the paper copy. If you use the electronic version or go in and enter the referral yourself, then that information is going to go to a reviewer who's going to review that information and make sure all the SWIS information is correct prior to saving it into the system. As a staff member, you're going to have what's called Referral Entry Only, or REO user. You will have access to your school SWIS account to enter referral data electronically. You won't have access to reports as an REO user. Once you enter in your data, typically the major and the minor, or maybe just the major referral, will go to a reviewer to be reviewed before being saved into the SWIS system. That referral reviewer role is typically someone who has SWIS admin or data entry access into SWIS. So a lot of times it's the principal, dean of students, student success worker, maybe a counselor in the building. Typically we would set them up as the reviewer, and they would check for the accuracy of that referral that you entered, and then maybe have to check back with you with some follow-up questions. In your next and final section for the SWIS Google Classroom, you're going to watch a video on how to enter a behavioral referral into your SWIS account.